Today's lesson is 6.2, the human digestive system. So what we're going to learn about in this section is the digestive system's anatomy. So all the parts of the digestive system. We'll also look at how the body processes the food and drink that we take in on a daily basis. So from the ingestion of food, the breakdown of macromolecules, and then absorption of nutrients, and finally the excretion of wastes. So we'll be looking at how do the organs of the digestive system work together to digest the food we eat and the macromolecules in our foods, the carbohydrates, the lipids, and the proteins. And then in what way does the body facilitate the exchange of energy and matter from the digestive system? All right, so firstly, we have to know the structures of the digestive system. Okay, so we acquire the nutrients from the food we eat, and then the body must process the food we eat mechanically and chemically. So the digestive system, or the tract, it's a long tube. It starts with the mouth, and it ends at the very bottom here with the anus. And everything in between is part of a complex and automatic response. So basically, it ensures that the food taken in ends up being converted to either usable molecules, which get absorbed, or to unusable waste products, which will get eliminated. There are also important accessory organs that are necessary for digestion. So they're not directly part of the digestive tract, but they are there to help with digestion. All right, so you do need to be able to, you need to be familiar with this sort of diagram and be able to label this sort of diagram. All right, so we have the oral cavity here, or the mouth. There are salivary glands here, 1, 2, 3. Then we have the pharynx leading to this long tube here. That's the esophagus. From the esophagus, food will enter the stomach. This here is the stomach. From the stomach, it will enter the small intestine, which is all of this. From there, it goes into the large intestine, which is this. And then from there, there's the rectum. And after that is the anus. So you'll notice some accessory organs that were not part of the digestive tract. They are the liver. So this large organ here is the liver. This greenish structure right under the liver, that's the gallbladder. This structure here looks kind of like a leaf close to the stomach. That is the pancreas. And there is the appendix shown right here coming off of the large intestine right there. All right, this is just another diagram. This diagram is including the structures of the digestive system and also giving a little bit of a summary of their functions. So starting here again at the mouth area, we have those salivary glands. They are important for secreting enzymes, especially a starch digesting enzyme. The mouth, that's where mechanical digestion takes place, chewing and mixing the food with saliva. Next is the esophagus, which directs the food from the mouth to the stomach. In the stomach, there will be some churning and mixing happening, which will grind up the food to a liquid mass. But the stomach also contains acid and enzymes to help with digestion. From there, that will enter the small intestine. And within the small intestine, there are enzymes that will digest macromolecules. And there will also be absorption occurring there as well. The large intestine main functions are absorbing water and salts and then passing the waste um, towards the rectum. The rectum will store the waste prior to elimination, and then the anus, it holds the rectum closed. It will then allow waste to be eliminated. The accessory organs that aid in digestion, so we have already talked about the salivary glands. Next is the liver. That's where bile is made and helps with the digestion of fats. Gallbladder stores the bile until needed. The pancreas manufactures enzymes that are going to digest some macromolecules. It also secretes bicarbonate to neutralize stomach acids to enter the small intestine. So that's a quick summary of all the structures and organs. All right, and now we'll start talking about the digestive process. So the 4 components of the digestive process. The first process is ingestion. That's eating and taking in of nutrients. The second component is digestion. This is the breakdown of the complex organic molecules into their smaller components by enzymes. Third is absorption. This is the transport of the digested nutrients to the cells of the body. And lastly is egestion, or the removal of food waste from the body. All right, so digestion begins, it starts at the mouth and then goes to the esophagus. So in the mouth, we talked about the salivary glands that we saw in the diagram. So there is saliva. This is the watery fluid produced by the salivary glands, and it contains this enzyme, amylase. And this enzyme, amylase, will start breaking down starches right in the mouth, or your complex carbohydrates, to simpler carbohydrates. So that is a type of chemical digestion. It starts in the mouth when the enzyme in the saliva, amylase, starts to break down starch into simpler sugars, into disaccharides. Saliva also dissolves food particles and makes it possible to taste what is being eaten, and saliva also lubricates the food so that it can be swallowed. All right, so all that just within the saliva and coming from the salivary glands. The teeth in the mouth are important for the physical or the mechanical digestion of food. All right, as your teeth chew up the food and food gets ground into smaller pieces, it increases the surface area available for chemical digestion of any starch that has been ingested. And then as you chew, your tongue rolls the food into a smooth lump-like mass that's called a bolus. So the bolus then gets pushed to the back of your mouth for swallowing. All right, so once you've swallowed, food will now travel from the mouth to the stomach by this long tube called the esophagus. All right, and there is this these contractions called peristalsis. It's a rhythmic wave-like contraction of muscle that will move food along the gastrointestinal tract. It will move food or fluid from the esophagus to the stomach, even if you're standing on your head, all right, because of that peristaltic action. This diagram here is showing the contractions, okay, so contraction of muscle, and there inside here, inside the esophagus, is that bolus of food that was eaten. Then eventually we need to enter the stomach, Entry to the stomach is controlled by a ring-like muscular structure. It's called the esophageal sphincter. All right, so here is the stomach, and up here we can see the esophageal sphincter. So there would have been a tube linked to this. That would have been the esophagus. All right, so 3 important functions in the stomach. Firstly, it is storage, so storing food. Secondly, there is some digestion happening. And then thirdly, pushing food into the small intestine. So in the stomach, there is both physical and chemical digestion occurring in the stomach. And when the food enters the stomach and gets mixed into the gastric juices of the stomach, it is now called chyme. So in the esophagus, it was called the bolus. Now, when the food and gastric juice get mixed together in the stomach, it's now called chyme. And the gastric juice in the stomach is responsible for chemical digestion. It's made up of water, mucus, salts, hydrochloric acid, and enzymes. And the stomach has it's very acidic in the stomach. It has a pH of about 1 to 3, so very acidic in the stomach. And that acidic environment is necessary because it starts to soften and break down proteins in the chyme. The low pH also serves to kill most bacteria that get ingested along with the food we eat. All right, so here again was the esophageal sphincter. Food enters the stomach, gets stored in this area. This is showing that there's 3 layers of muscles which are there to mechanically digest food and mix it up and churn it. Food gets mixed and churned here, and this is just showing that there's folds inside the stomach which enable the stomach to stretch and contract. And then at the end here in this region, there is another sphincter muscle. It's called the pyloric sphincter, and it's going to control the chyme to now enter the small intestine. And then here is the beginning of the small intestine called the duodenum. Now, the stomach we talked about is very, very acidic. Why doesn't the stomach digest the proteins in its own cells? So basically, why isn't the stomach digesting itself? So firstly, the stomach secretes very little gastric juice until food is present. Then some stomach cells, they secrete a special mucus substance which prevents gastric juice from harming the cells of the stomach lining. And next, the stomach produces its protein digesting enzyme. It's called pepsin, and it's in a form that remains inactive until hydrochloric acid is present. Then, once active, pepsin hydrolyzes proteins to yield polypeptides, which is a first step in protein digestion in the digestive tract. Absorption in the stomach. Very few substances are absorbed from the chyme in the stomach. Most substances in the chyme haven't been broken down yet sufficiently. Some water and salts get absorbed, and if you've taken medication like anti-inflammatory medications like aspirin, as well as alcohol, they get absorbed in the stomach. So this explains why aspirin can irritate the lining of the stomach, and why many people feel the alcohol's intoxicating effect so quickly, because those substances do get absorbed in the stomach. Okay, so in the small intestine, then we've entered the small intestine, and it's up to 7 meters in length, but it's only 2.5 centimeters in diameter. and that's why it's called the small intestine, is because of its diameter. The large intestine, by comparison, is only 1.5 meters in length, but its diameter is 7.6 centimeters in length. All right, so that's why the large intestine is called the large intestine. All right, so here in the small intestine, we see these finger-like projections in the small intestine, and those are very important because they increase the surface area for absorption. All right, so they are finger-like projections that look like this. And if we look closer at the villi, we will find microvilli on top of the villi. So these are further microscopic finger-like projections of the cell membrane. All right, and again, they are there to increase surface area. In this figure here, we can see how long the small intestine is. So like I said, 7.0 meters. And then here is like an average person, 1.8 meters. All right, so in the small intestine, digesting and absorbing nutrients, the main function of the small intestine is to complete the digestion of macromolecules and to absorb their component subunits. So there's three regions of the small intestine. There's the duodenum, the jejunum, and then the ileum. Those are the three parts of the small intestine. The first part, the duodenum, it's the first 25 centimeters of the small intestine, and there are ducts or channels from the liver and pancreas that join with this part of the small intestine to form one duct that enters the duodenum. This is an important site for the chemical digestion of the chyme, which was received from the stomach. The second part is the jejunum. It's 2.5 meters long, continues to break down food so that the end products can be absorbed. The last part of the small intestine is called the ileum. It's about 3 meters long, and it absorbs nutrients and pushes the remaining undigested material into the large intestine. All right, next we're going to talk about the important accessory organs. So digestive assistance is provided by substances that are created by these three organs located near the stomach and the small intestine. So the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. So the pancreas is close to the stomach. It's this leaf-like structure. That's the pancreas. The liver is this large organ. Students usually will confuse this with the stomach, so just remember the stomach has the tube going to the small intestine as well as the esophagus tube entering the stomach. All right, the liver doesn't. And then the other one is the gallbladder, shown in green here. They are accessory organs because they're not physically part of the digestive tract, but they are important because they secrete substances to continue digestion. All right, so we'll talk about the pancreas first. And the pancreas is very important because it delivers about 1 liter of pancreatic fluid to the duodenum each day. It contains enzymes, including the following. So the first two we'll talk about are trypsin and chymotrypsin. These are proteases. So these are enzymes that digest proteins into smaller polypeptides. Then we have pancreatic amylase. So remember that there was an amylase in the mouth from the saliva that started the process of carbohydrate digestion. So now the pancreas releases a pancreatic amylase. It's a carbohydrase, okay, meaning it's an enzyme that's going to digest starch in the small intestine. All right, polysaccharides are digested into shorter chains of simpler sugars. So recall from our previous lesson that the subunits of carbohydrates are sugars. All right, so the enzymes are now breaking down those carbohydrates into smaller chains of simpler sugars or shorter chains. And another enzyme that comes from the pancreas is called lipase. Okay, this digests fat. So remember, fats are also called lipids. So the enzyme is called lipase. It digests fat into the 3 fatty acids and other products. The pancreatic fluid also contains bicarbonate, which is important because the stomach is very acidic, all right, but the stomach has protection. It has that mucus lining, but when the chyme enters the small intestine, it has to be neutralized. Okay, it can't be acidic. So this bicarbonate from the pancreatic fluid, it neutralizes the hydrochloric acid from the stomach. It gives the chyme in the duodenum it gives it an alkaline pH of about 8. The liver. This is the main digestion-related secretion. The main digestion-related secretion of the liver is bile. It's a greenish yellow fluid mixture that's made up of bile pigments and bile salts. So these bile salts are important in the digestion of fats. They work like a detergent. They'll disperse large fat droplets into a fine suspension of smaller droplets in the chyme. This emulsification process, it produces a greater surface area of fats on which then the lipases can act. And then therefore the digestion of fats can occur more quickly. The gallbladder stores the bile between meals. All right, so just remember that bile, it gets produced in the liver, but then it gets stored in the gallbladder. All right, so the fat-containing chyme in the duodenum stimulates the gallbladder to contract. The bile then gets transported through a duct, which is shared by both the gallbladder and the liver, and into the duodenum. Okay, so just a quick overview of chemical digestion and absorption in the small intestine. So we're looking at our macromolecules. We have our complex carbohydrates, we have our proteins, fats, and then nucleic acids. So for carbohydrates, digestion started in the mouth because there's an enzyme in the saliva called salivary amylase. It'll start breaking down polysaccharides into disaccharides. All right. Nothing for carbohydrates happens in the stomach. Then next, it happens in the small intestine where the polysaccharides and disaccharides will get broken down into monosaccharides, all right, by the carbohydrates, the pancreatic amylase, sucrase, maltase, and lactase. Proteins, there's no digestion in the mouth. They start to get digested in the stomach. The proteins, and there's an enzyme called pepsin, which will break down the proteins into small chained polypeptides. And then in the small intestine, the proteases, trypsin and chymotrypsin, will break down the smaller peptides into peptides, and then peptidases will break down those into amino acids. Fats, no digestion in the mouth, no digestion in the stomach. In the small intestine, the fat droplets get broken down into smaller droplets by bile. The fat droplets get emulsified, and then the lipases, which is the enzyme, will break down the fat into glycerol and fatty acids. And then nucleic acids in the small intestine, there's enzymes called nucleases and nucleosidases, which will break down the nucleic acids into the nitrogen-containing bases, sugars, and phosphates. All right, and this here is a table from the textbook, which also goes through all the different enzymes of the digestive system, where they're acting, like which part of the digestive tract, what type of food is getting digested, the product of digestion, and the origin of the enzyme. So for example, we talked about the salivary amylase. It acts in the mouth, right? Because that's where the saliva is produced. The pH level is about 7 in the mouth. The food that's digested are starches and glycogen. The product of digestion is taking that polysaccharide or starch and digesting it to make it into a disaccharide. And the origin of the enzyme is the salivary glands. All right, so a very important chart, a summary chart of all the enzymes of the digestive system. All right, I'm just going to pause it here.